Alright, so check this out. Came across an incredibly creepy family a while back. Okay, so I never really post anything on Reddit, mostly just reading, so please excuse me if I do or say anything that isn't common courtesy here. In around 2018, 2019, I, a 25-year-old female, who at the time was 18 or 19, was living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in Nebraska, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started buying huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions. You get it. Plus, his parents were super cool, and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, even though I was, and am, quite scared of the dark. So, I just wouldn't go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to and from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you pass one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times just to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down, listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch-black road with thick forest on both sides and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3 or 4 people. A tall, slim woman with an average height/weight man, a child that had short hair but I couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing, and I couldn't see their face either, that was maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered, but not nice. They also weren't carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street in the same direction that I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking, had music playing, etc., but they didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all, at the same time, stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute crap out of me, I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards probably for a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of three reactions. They either immediately think I'm cuckoo, they think I'm lying, or they've had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me, honestly. It was, and still is, the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the crap out of someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery or assault, or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option. Several people in the comments have their own theories as to what might have been going on. One person suggested maybe the empty stroller had firearms in it or any other kind of assault weapons, and it was just a ploy to try to rob you should you have passed them in your car. One person even thought that they might have thrown the empty stroller into your car as to freak you out and to get you to stop so that they can do whatever they planned on doing. Another person had a different approach. They suggested the OP look up that road for any fatal traffic accidents. They say, who knows? Could have been a car crash way back when, and the empty stroller? Well, maybe the baby survived. Someone impersonated my sister and invited me to the shadiest part of Los Angeles. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I've never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew that I had a half-sister in LA. But my parents had this weird anger toward her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I had looked her up on social media, and I knew what she looked like. But that was about all. We had never actually met. She was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see. Out of nowhere, one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate. She had Facebook friends, and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA, and still am, and I had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was so excited about that idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk with her and she just didn't click with me and started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some kind of disagreement, someone says something hurtful, and then we were both crying in front of everyone? Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for dessert instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have in front of all these other people. So I couldn't bring myself to go. I didn't want to risk having a meltdown in front of other people, and I was worried about how messy that it could get. A few weeks later, I Googled that park just to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. And that's when I learned that something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who's lived in LA for a long time will tell you that it is not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for being left alone. So now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time, a local college. I had a friend who went to her school, and I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and ask her if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected, and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great. We got along so well. My friend was also very happy to do that for us. The three of us had so much fun. We weren't bursting in tears, but we let out a few. We had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, she said that she hadn't used Facebook since high school. So clearly, someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media, though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone had been impersonating my sister. They knew I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were. I don't know if I even want to find out. Meeting my sister after all these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. There are some LA locals in the comments, and the consensus is that this must have been MacArthur Park. OP responds simply with, "Sounds like you know LA better than I do." The marketplace deal that almost trapped me. I was browsing Marketplace when I came across an ad for an SUV, a Saturn Vue in great condition. But here's the kicker. It was priced at about 50% below market value. I thought, this has to be a scam. But curiosity got the better of me. The ad had a phone number, so I called it. A young guy picked up, sounding friendly enough, and went on about how the vehicle was in perfect shape. When I asked why he was selling it, he mumbled something about wanting something sportier. Yeah, right, I thought, but I was intrigued enough to agree to go check it out. That's when things got weird. He insisted that I bring cash, and a dark feeling crept over me. A warning sign. But I brushed it off. I had the money, and against my better judgment, I brought it. As I drove to the address that he'd given me, that uneasy feeling turned into full-blown dread. I was literally seconds away from pulling up to the house when I called him again to confirm. His first question, "Do you have the cash?" My gut twisted. I answered, yes. But something told me not to park in front of the house. Instead, I parked a block up the street and decided to wait. I sat there for a few minutes, looking around. There was no Saturn Vue in sight, no signs of any vehicle for sale, and the street was eerily quiet, almost too still. Then, out of nowhere, a white Audi station wagon slowed down in front of the house. Inside, I saw a group of young men, all of them scanning the area. They looked tense, on edge, as if they were searching for someone or something. They didn't spot me, tucked away further up the street, and I watched as they crept slowly past the house, their eyes darting around until they finally drove past me. They didn't suspect that I was sitting there with a fat envelope of cash. I could feel my heart pounding as I watched them drive away. It all felt wrong, very wrong. My gut had been screaming at me from the start, but now I knew. This wasn't about a car. This was about setting someone up for something much worse. I drove home, feeling both ashamed that I'd let it get this far and grateful that nothing had happened. Yet. Later, I contacted the police, gave them the ad number, the phone number, and told them exactly what had happened. I insisted that they do something before someone got hurt. Days passed, and to my knowledge, they did nothing. Then, the news broke. Story after story surfaced of people being lured by ads just like the one I saw, told to bring cash, only to be threatened with guns or knives and robbed of their money. No descriptions of the perpetrators were ever given, just vague warnings telling people to be careful. Even now, I wonder what might have happened if I'd pulled up to that house. What if I had ignored my gut completely and walked right into whatever they had planned? All I know is sometimes a quote-unquote great deal isn't worth the risk. Trust your gut. The OP includes an addition that says, "The officer on the phone asked me if I was threatened or if they did anything to me. But they could have assigned an officer to call the number and check things out, maybe pose as a buyer or something. Instead, they brushed me off as a paranoid mental case. So frustrating." Imagine starting every day with better focus, hitting your creative flow faster, and wrapping up with a good night's sleep. That's what Magic Mind is all about. It's packed with natural ingredients like adaptogens and nootropics that help you stay on task, reduce stress, and tap into those flow states where creativity just clicks. Since I've started using Magic Mind every day, I've noticed that it's a lot easier to focus on my bigger projects without distractions creeping in. And at the end of the day, my mind is actually ready for some rest, so I wake up refreshed and ready to take on the next day. If you're looking to improve your entire day from morning to night, go to magicmind.com/scarystories and use my code ScaryStories20 for a huge discount, whether you want to try the trial pack or a monthly subscription. I want you to feel better and save money while doing it. Give yourself the boost that you deserve with Magic Mind. Trust me, your productivity and sleep will thank you. Creeper beats on my door and turns Ring camera off. This happened a few years ago, but it stuck with me because of how weird and scary it was. So, every year for the past few years, my parents have been going on a week-long anniversary trip, leaving me home alone. I was 20, so it was more than an appropriate age. Well, this time around, some weird stuff happened the first day that they were gone, and then this happened the night before that they were supposed to come home. The first day they were gone, a guy came to the door to drop something off in the morning, but I didn't want to answer it as it was a stranger, and I thought he'd just leave it at the door like usual. He stayed for about 5 minutes and then got in his car and started to drive off, to which I went outside because I thought he finally left it. Then, this man got out of his car, leaving it in the middle of the road just to give me my package that I didn't have to sign for at all. No signature needed or anything. He wasn't dressed like a delivery person, and he was in a beat-up car. Very weird and uncomfy. Skipping to the end of the week, I was just chilling out in my living room, and all of a sudden, at 11 o'clock at night, I see this rather large figure approach my front door. The glass is dimpled so you can't see features, but just a silhouette, and starts banging on my door, and he did so for like a minute straight. He stands there and doesn't leave for probably 10 minutes, and in that time beats on the door a few times over. Luckily, my sister and her family live not even a mile away from me, so I call them, and her husband comes to get me. By this time, I'm in full panic mode, and I realize that my dogs are in the backyard. My back door is 90% glass, and I was horrified that this person was going to come through the back gate and try to come into my house as my dogs were barking up a storm. Anyway, I get my dogs inside the house, and my brother-in-law finally shows up, and whoever was there was gone. He takes me to my sister's house, and we check the front door cameras to see who was there. The cameras had been turned off the whole time this person was there, and for an hour before he started banging on my door. The cameras had been on before that time period and during the time that we were looking at the cameras, but they were somehow shut off for about an hour and a half, which was odd, because they're not the type that needs to be charged, and they had never glitched out before then, but were actually very sensitive. To this day, I don't know who it was that showed up at my house. I checked the local news and everything, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know if they were trying to rob my house, or if they had other plans, or if it was potentially the delivery guy from earlier that week, but it still freaks me out to think about, and I hate being home alone at night because of it. Several people in the comments provide sage advice, such as, "You should have reported this, and report it while you can, it's not too late." Somebody else commented that most doorbell cameras are connected by Wi-Fi, and there are simple devices that can jam the signal, unless you have a hardwired camera, which is rare. I was almost kidnapped. This entire scenario happened just a few years ago when I used to take walks alone, especially at night, which is something I thought very little of since I lived in a heavily residential, wealthy area. In other words, on the trail I'd frequent, houses were always within sight. On one such night, shortly into my walk, I see a figure walking a few hundred feet behind me, something I knew immediately was odd, considering it was around 10 at night at the time. At first, I discounted this thought since it was a public trail, and they could have very well been doing the exact same thing as me, just going for a walk. I continued on for roughly 5 to 10 minutes or so before looking behind me once more, only to find the same person still trailing me. Keep in mind, at this point, I'd gone through a few turns by now on the trail, meaning it was becoming more and more unlikely that this person just so happened to be going to the same location. I decided to take odd paths and directions, turning off into gravel and weirder, more roundabout side areas, and they still followed me. By the time I was reaching the apex of my journey, passing by the local park, they were maybe less than 60 feet behind me, a distance that they could have easily have covered in seconds. It's then that I decided to call my family. I had researched for this, I knew what to do, and believe it or not, the call didn't go through. As it turns out, my phone was a recent gift, and its service had been set up improperly, meaning that no matter how many times I frantically called in that moment, nothing would happen. It's a decision that I call back to as one of my best to this day. I acted as if the call had gone through and was on the phone with my mom. I was miming out and talking audibly about my location, and the person behind me beginning to briefly describe them. Even in the act, I wasn't able to really do so, as I could never get a proper view of their face, as if it was somehow shrouded in something, but I did my best with what I had. Sure enough, when I turned around again, they were nowhere to be seen. Not that they had turned off and walked another direction, but that they weren't there to begin with. Weeks later, my mom told me that a police officer had come into her work and warned about abductions that had been happening in our area, specifically for child trafficking and organ trade. I count myself as very lucky, and whenever I leave the house now, I'm very aware, only doing so during the day while taking a large knife with me. There was a point later on in that neighborhood that a car was clearly following me, turning around into a cul-de-sac where there was no logical reason for them to be except for me. But this was the most obvious example of an attempted kidnapping. This person clarifies in the comments that he is an over 6-foot-tall man, was in his teens at the time, and was wearing large, bulky clothing, specifically because it made him look larger and a little more imposing. Another commenter adds, "Dang, that's terrifying. I guess, whether you're in a wealthy, well-lit area, if there's people, there's a possibility of crime." Wrong place, wrong time. I've been thinking of sharing about this incident for a while now. I've told people that I know in person, but I want to get my story out there to help spread awareness about things like this and in an effort to help put it further behind me. For some context, this happened to me, 25 MTF, back in April of this year, back when I was pre-HRT and still had more masculine clothes. At the risk of sounding cliche, I never thought that something like what happened that evening could ever happen to me, but it did. And the part that still bothers me is that it happened so close to where I live with my family. In fact, it was a mere 2 blocks away. Now, on to the incident. There's been a few times in our house where no one really feels like cooking dinner that night, so we either order out something together or we just find our own food. That evening was one of those times. I was craving pizza, so after putting on my spring jacket and a pair of gloves, I left my house around 7:20 p.m. and started walking to the nearest Domino's. Now, in case anyone asks, I can't drive, and it was only a 15-minute walk anyway. Partway there, I came across an old white car. I think it was either a Honda or a Ford that was parked on the sidewalk. I was annoyed, but I really didn't think much about it, deciding to walk around the front of the car as to not walk into the road. Unfortunately, readers, that's where I had unintentionally caught the wrong kind of attention. I had barely stepped a mere 10 feet away from where the car was when I suddenly heard two people calling out to me rather aggressively as I was readjusting my gloves. When I turned around, I saw two rather intimidating-looking dudes, the younger of the two approaching me, while the older one remained by the door of the building that the car was parked in front of. I don't remember much about the older guy. We'll just call him Thug 2. Mainly that he was a big man with a beard and a leather jacket, but I'll never forget the younger guy. We'll call him Thug 1. He was slightly taller than me. I'm 5'6", had short hair and a goatee, wearing sneakers, a ring, blue jeans, and a white muscle shirt. This guy was aggressive from the start, getting up in my space and immediately accusing me of breaking into his buddy's car. Thug 2 interjected with something along the lines of, "You better not have," which indicated to me that it was his car that I had just walked around and thus was being accused of breaking into. I'm doing my best to type out what happened next, but honestly, everything was a blur. I remember trying to get a word in to plead my case, and Thug 1 not even giving me the chance. I remember the anger in his eyes as he kept accusing me. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, the asphalt of the road gashing my right elbow, having just been left hooked to my face. I remember screaming at him to leave me alone as he once again punched me, this time just above my hairline. I remember putting my gloved hand to my head, feeling something warm, and pulling it away to reveal blood where his ring had connected. I had to scramble to pick up one of my breast forms that had fallen out of my pocket bra and on the ground before I managed to half stumble, half run away from the two thugs. They were jeering at me, saying that I had better run. Looking back, I'm partially wishing that I had pulled out my phone to take a picture of my attackers, but I don't know. I think I subconsciously felt that doing that could have made it much worse. This happened around 7:30 at night. I managed to get as far away from the building as possible before sitting down in front of a nearby soccer club and calling my sister, who's a 20-year-old female, for help. She immediately told my stepdad, and they both got in his car and came to pick me up. We stopped at the Domino's that I was headed to for dinner, where they helped me get my pizza, which I didn't end up finishing it that night, but ate the rest of the next day, along with some napkins and a bag of ice for my injuries. After they dropped me off back home, my stepdad took my brother, who's a 25-year-old male, and headed over to the building to see if they had cameras to show what happened, while my sister was helping to sanitize my injuries. It was there that I got some sense of clarity on what was happening. It turned out that the building in question was a base for a local biker gang, who just happened to be associated with one of the most infamous gangs in North America. My stepdad and brother managed to talk to the members who were there. They later told me that the white car was gone and the two guys that I described were nowhere to be found, where they claimed 4 things. First, they claimed to not know who it was that attacked me, even though those thugs had walked out of their gang base. And they didn't know who I was when my stepdad showed them pictures that he took of my injuries for evidence. Secondly, they claimed that they were in the midst of a wake for a friend that they lost. Thirdly, apparently an hour before I had walked past their base, a crackhead was fiddling around with their car doors, so it was likely that when I walked past, those two thugs thought that he had come back. Lastly, despite the clear fact that those thugs somehow knew that I was there, they claimed that their cameras were broken and not in use. Initially, I was thinking of not doing anything about what happened and just continuing on with life. But after my bio dad called to check on me after he heard about what happened, I was convinced to go to the police station at 9 o'clock to file a report. While we all had a feeling that it likely wouldn't go anywhere, as it does with most incidents of gang violence, especially with an infamous gang involved, getting it on record for the police was still the right thing to do. Afterwards, the officer taking my report suggested that I head to the ER just to be safe, where I proceeded to wait for 5 to 7 hours before being seen by a doctor. The whole wait, I was just trying to stay awake, worried about what would happen if I fell asleep after having taken 2 blows to the head. Thankfully, the doctor reassured me that I was going to be all right while he was putting 4 stitches into the wound where Thug 1 hit me the second time. Eventually, I was sent home with instructions to be mindful of my stitches while I showered, which is what I immediately had as soon as I got home between 2:30 and 4:30 a.m. I'm very lucky that I didn't walk away from this with more serious trauma than I did. After that evening, it took me an entire week before I finally felt comfortable going outside. Even now, months later, despite that gang having long since moved their base, I still find myself reluctant to walk right past that building. And if I have to, I tend to walk on the other side of the road. I never saw Thug 1 or Thug 2 again, though I heard rumors that they were punished by the gang for assaulting me when the gang was allegedly trying to be less violent. And honestly, I hope I never see them again. I'm a little shaky reminiscing on that evening while typing this out, but I wanted to get this story out there to help spread further awareness about gang violence. A curious person in the comments asked, "How did you hear about the rumors about their punishment?" Really curious about that part. OP responds with, "Well, I probably could have been slightly more specific, but we actually live in a townhouse. As for the rumors, if I recall correctly, one of our neighbors is a retired gang leader with some ties, and my sister was there when my stepdad was talking about it with him." Odd job I worked in high school. I've pretty much worked every day of my life since about age 13. I was the type of kid that didn't want to work at McDonald's or retail, but worked real jobs. I did demolition, worked in an auto shop, worked in construction, and worked for a guy that did flooring. I knew that my parents were planning to kick me out of the house when I turned 18, but in actuality, they kicked me out when I was 17, just as high school ended, some 4 months before I turned 18. Anyway, one of the guys that I worked for paid me under the table. I didn't get an hourly wage, just a pay based on the job at hand. He would tell me, "You have to go in and tear out all the flooring, or all the cabinets, or gut the entire place, and it pays $200. But you have to get it done in however many nights he said it would." You see, he worked on bars, and restaurants, and shopping centers, office buildings, and things like that where we could only work during the night, which worked out for me because I could only work after school and on weekends. One time, he told me about a job where I was supposed to go in and remove all the glued down carpet and remove the black rubber base throughout a set of offices. It sounded easy enough. He said the job was going to take a couple weeks. That was alright with me because, at the time, I was saving for my first car. The building we were going to was part of some kind of base. It was like a military base, but not really active in that part. It was a huge set of buildings that were all empty except for the occasional desk or empty filing cabinets, but there was like a break room area that we were not working in that had some vending machines like for hot coffee, chicken soup, another vending machine had candy bars, and another had sodas. I made sure to bring all my free change with me along with my lunch. So, the first day, he takes me and shows me all the areas where I had to remove the flooring. The place was like a maze with long hallways and different office buildings and storage rooms. Some of the rooms led out to a large storage warehouse that still had a lot of equipment, mostly office machines, boxes, and other equipment that looked like medical stuff. We weren't supposed to go in there, but I saw it. The first night, he was there with me, mostly setting up stuff and marking the rooms that were to be worked on. I remember he had a can of red spray paint and just sprayed an X in the middle of each room on the old carpet. He also set up a couple of large dumpsters for me to throw the debris in and got me a large wheeled cart to put the debris in, as the longest point from the office to the dumpster seemed like walking over a city block. I'm sure I got my leg workout each time I went. The first night, since he was there, and I could blast my music as loud as I wanted because the place was dead empty, I just went working my way from office to office, removing old glued-down carpet and rubber wall base. I was told to be careful not to rip the drywall as I was removing the black rubber base, so I would go down with a large putty knife and cut the glue away as I removed it. The average office would fill up the wheeled cart, so I would have to make trips to go empty the cart after each room. Most of the hallways had those timed light switches where you turn the knob and it gave you like 30 seconds of light. The second night, I had assumed my boss would be there with me, but no. He went on to finish another job and said he would be back to pick me up around 5 a.m. So I worked from about 7 p.m. until 5 p.m., and by 5, I was waiting for him at the curb. The second night that I was alone in this huge building, I swear, everything started to get to me. It seemed like the lights would just go off randomly and shorter than it should have. I did my best not to freak out over this. I didn't have time to get scared or imagine things. Just pull up glued down carpet, cut it in stripes, roll it up, and put it in the cart, and remove the black rubber base pile from the cart too. I soon decided that instead of making multiple trips with one cartload, that I would just start stacking up debris in the hallways as I went from office to office. Some of the hallways had carpet too, so I worked doing them too. I would take a break every 3 to 4 hours to go down to the break room, buy a can of Coke or maybe a coffee, wash up, and eat a sandwich that I brought. Several times I would walk out of the break room or even the restroom and the entire hallway would be pitch black. I would go find the switches and turn them back on. One time, I was at an end of the hallway and it was a dead end with 2 offices on either side. No exit, just end of the hallway. The lights went out again and I flipped them back on by turning the knob, and I swear I saw movement down the hall, like if someone crossed in the dark down the hall. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. I don't doubt that people who work on base might come over, maybe to the storage area, but this was at like 2 a.m. at this point. The next night, I brought a flashlight with me, so if the lights went out again, I could turn on the flashlight. It wasn't so bad when you were in the offices, but in the hallway, it was darker than dark. One of the odd things, too, was the fact that most of the offices didn't have any windows. A lot of these offices were deep inside the building, so they were like in the middle of the building with no windows. Not that any outside light would help me anyway. That same night, my batteries on my radio went out, so I had a lot of silent work ahead of me. I started to hear weird noises, like creaking sounds, as if a door somewhere was slowly being opened. Another time, I heard a loud bang, as if something slammed against metal. On one of my trips to use the restroom, I hear what sounded like a machine being used somewhere. Another time, when the lights went out, as I was putting them back on, I saw a shadow again. I called out, but no one was there. The last night that I was working, a little more closer to the exit area, where there was like a loading dock and where the dumpsters were. It was near the door to the large warehouse facility, and that night I had replenished my radio battery and brought my Walkman as a backup. I still had my flashlight and brought a little cooler with me for drinks so that I didn't have to venture back into the hallways to find the break room. I even resigned myself to peeing behind the loading docks outside rather than going to the nearest bathroom. Like I said earlier, I had put a lot of debris in the hallways as I was working from room to room, so for the last couple hours finishing up, I was wheeling debris to the dumpsters, and as I walked back down a hallway that was an L shape that led deeper into the endless hallways, I looked up and I saw that the lights far off in the distance were on. I was like, nope. One of the last things I remember from that night, I heard a very loud bang crash from inside the storage area. I hurried up my last bits of cleaning up and started taking all of my tools outside to wait for my boss. He was a little late picking me up that morning, but I started to feel better when the sunlight started to break. He went in to check on my work. He was only gone for about 15 minutes, but I get the feeling that he also noped it out of there because he rushed back to the truck and was like, okay, good to go. He also contracted to install all new carpet in all the areas that I removed. He used a different crew for that. I never went back inside and never wanted to again. I'm not sure what kind of office building it was. It was government for sure, probably part of the military. Nothing had names or signs except odd signs with numbers and letters that I could remember. That was one really weird and creepy odd job that I did in high school, and I'm not sure what kind of people or spirits lived in there, but they didn't appreciate my loud music or me using the lights.